the billionaire humiliated a single dad in public. What happened next left her speechless. Before we begin, if you believe that kindness has a way of finding its way back, that goodness, even when it goes unseen, is never truly wasted, please like this video, share it with someone who needs a reminder today, leave a comment below, and subscribe to Heart Kindness Tales. Now let us begin. The rain was coming down hard over downtown Chicago the afternoon everything changed. Not just for Desmond Hale. For everyone watching. And for a woman who had everything the world called success, but had quietly forgotten what it cost other people for her to have it. The cafe was called Linden and Grove. It sat on the corner of Michigan Avenue and Randolph Street, the kind of place with exposed brick walls, hand-poured pour-overs, and pastries priced like small investments. It was not the kind of place Desmond Hale walked into often. But on this particular Tuesday afternoon, he had a reason. A very important, 7-year-old reason named Wren. Desmond was 39 years old. He was not a tall man, not a loud man, not the kind of man who entered a room and made people turn their heads. He wore a grey janitor's uniform with the logo of Alderma Property Services stitched above his left breast pocket. His boots were steel-toed and scuffed. His hands were rough in the way that only comes from years of doing work that most people pretend doesn't exist. He had a calm face, the kind that had learned long ago that frowning took energy he could not afford to waste. He was on his lunch break. 45 minutes. Just enough time to walk the 3 blocks from the Alderma building where he worked his evening shift, buy 1 cupcake, vanilla with pink frosting, Wren had told him specifically, with as many sprinkles as they can fit, and make it back before his break ended. Today was Wren's birthday. She was 7 years old. She had her mother's eyes and her father's stubbornness and a laugh that could cut through any difficult room like a beam of light through curtains. She was also, at this exact moment, standing right beside her father in the cafe line, because her school had an early dismissal and Desmond had picked her up on his way. She was in her purple coat, her hair in 2 neat puffs, and her nose barely reached the top of the glass display case where the cupcakes sat beneath little paper signs. She pressed both palms flat against the glass and stared. "Daddy," she whispered. "That one." "I see it, baby," Desmond said quietly. The line was moving slowly. 2 people ahead. Then 1. Then Desmond stepped up to the counter, smiling at the young woman behind the register. "Hi there," he said. "Just the 1 vanilla cupcake, please." "The one with the sprinkles." "Of course," the cashier said, sliding it into a small box. "That'll be $8.50. Desmond reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out his wallet, worn at the edges and soft from years of use. He counted carefully. A 5. 2 ones. Some change. $7.30. He stared at the bills in his hand for a moment. He had thought he had more. He had been so careful this week, watching every dollar. But that morning, before his grocery shift, the school had called. Wren's field trip fee was due that day or she wouldn't be able to go. $12. He had paid it without hesitating. Of course he had. He was short by $1.20. He checked his other pocket. Nothing. He checked the small zipper pouch inside the wallet. A gas station receipt and an old library card. He looked up at the cashier, his expression steady but his jaw tight. "I'm sorry, I'm just a little short. Do you all have anything for around $7? Maybe a smaller one." "We don't have a smaller size," the cashier said apologetically, glancing at the display. "The cupcakes are all the same price." "Okay," Desmond said. He nodded slowly. "Okay, let me just think for a second." He looked down at Wren. She was still watching the cupcake through the glass with the absolute faith of a child who has not yet learned that wanting something doesn't mean you get it. And for a moment, Desmond felt the particular weight that single parents carry in silence, the weight of being the only wall between your child and a world that does not care about birthdays. That was the moment she walked in. Her name was Corinna Voss. She was 34 years old and had been on the cover of 3 business magazines in the last 2 years. She was the founder and CEO of Novatether, a technology company that had redefined how urban infrastructure communicated with emergency response systems. She had started the company at 26 with a concept, a second-hand laptop, and a fury she had converted, over the years, into a billion-dollar enterprise. She had 2.3 million followers on Instagram. She ran a live stream every Tuesday called Corinna Unfiltered, where she walked through her day in real time, talking about business, decisions, and what she called the mindset of the unapologetic. Her audience loved it. She was the woman who had made it look effortless. Who never seemed rattled. Who never seemed to need anything from anyone. What they did not see, what Corinna herself had not looked at in years, was the place in her where none of that certainty existed. Where a little girl who had lost her parents too early had decided that needing people was a vulnerability she could not afford. Where she had replaced grief with goals and softness with structure and told herself, over and over, that this was strength. She walked into Linden and Grove with her phone propped in her left hand, filming, her earpiece in her right ear, mid-conversation with someone on her team. 240,000 people were watching live. She was already running 12 minutes behind for a meeting, and she had not eaten since 5 in the morning. She got in line behind Desmond. She glanced at the display case. She glanced at her phone. She glanced at the back of the man in front of her, still standing at the counter, still quietly sorting through his wallet again. She waited 15 seconds. Then 20. Then she exhaled, sharp and audible, and lifted her phone slightly so her camera had a better angle. "Is there a problem up there?" she said. Desmond didn't turn around. "Just a moment," he said calmly. Another 10 seconds passed. The cashier was looking between both of them with the expression of someone who deeply wished she had called in sick. Corinna turned the phone toward the register. Her live stream comments were already filling with curiosity. She gave a small, dry laugh. 200,000 of you are watching me try to get a coffee, she said to the camera, and apparently we're all waiting because, let's see, she stepped slightly to the side to look past Desmond, deliberately letting the camera catch his worn uniform, the wallet in his hand. Somebody didn't check their balance before they left the house today. The comment count exploded. People laughing in the chat. Heart emojis. People tagging friends. "Sir," she said, louder now, looking directly at the back of his head. "If you can't cover it, maybe just step aside so people who can actually afford to be here can move on with their day." The cafe went completely quiet. Every head turned. Desmond turned around slowly. He looked at her. Not with anger. Not with the defensive heat of a man who had been provoked. He looked at her with the calm of someone who had been talked to this way before, who had decided long ago that he would not give that kind of person the reaction they wanted. But Corinna's phone was still up. Still live. The camera was still on him. And it was also on Wren. Wren, who had stepped slightly out from behind her father and was looking up at Corinna with her brow furrowed in the way it got when she was trying to understand something the adults around her weren't explaining. Her hands were still pressed against the glass display case. The cupcake with the pink frosting and the sprinkles was still right there on the other side of it. Then Wren said something in a small, very clear voice that would later be described by millions of people as the moment they stopped breathing. "Daddy," she said. "Are poor people not allowed to buy cupcakes?" Nobody in the cafe made a sound. Desmond looked down at his daughter. Something moved through his face, not embarrassment, not defeat, but a pain of a different kind. The pain of a parent watching their child encounter the edges of a world that is not always kind. "Come on, baby," he said quietly. He put the wallet back in his pocket. He looked at the cashier. "I'm sorry for the trouble. We'll come back another time." "Daddy." "We'll find you a cupcake," he said. "I promise." He took her hand. They walked out of the cafe. The door closed behind them. The rain was still coming down. Corinna lowered her phone. Inside, nobody said anything for a long moment. Not a single person. One woman near the window had her hand over her mouth. A man at the corner table set down his coffee and just stared at the door. The cashier looked down at the counter and did not look up again. And in the live stream comments, which had been full of laughing emojis and clapping hands 10 seconds ago, something had shifted so completely and so fast that even Corinna, glancing at the screen, couldn't quite process what she was seeing. That little girl. Did you just? This isn't funny anymore. Turn the camera off. She's 7. By the time Corinna left Linden and Grove, the clip had already been cut and reposted 17 times. Within 4 hours, it had been viewed 9 million times. By midnight, the number was 42 million. The internet had a verdict, and Corinna Voss was not going to like it. The comments came in waves. First the immediate reactions, shock, outrage, the collective anger that forms fastest when a child is involved. People replayed Wren's question. They slowed it down. They captured the frame. Her small face, confused and open, asking the thing that none of the adults in that room had said out loud but all of them had felt. Are poor people not allowed to buy cupcakes? That question traveled. It spread through parent groups and church newsletters and text chains between old friends who hadn't spoken in months. It got read on morning radio. A senator quoted it in a tweet. It became the kind of line that people put into the world not because they wanted to go viral but because they needed to say it to someone. Then came the second wave. The people who recognized the uniform. Who had worked service jobs. Who had stood at a register short by $1 or $2 with someone sighing behind them. Who knew exactly what it felt like to have your child witness a moment of humiliation and have no way to explain it that didn't break something. And then the third wave, which was quieter and in some ways the most powerful. The people who felt like they recognized something about the man in the video. Not from the clip, but from somewhere else. Something they couldn't quite place. Who started leaving comments that said things like, "I've seen this guy before, not from this video, and does anyone else think they know who this is, and someone look at the early Nova Tether founding team photos, I'm just saying." The internet was already circling something. A journalist named Yvette Okafor was about to give it a name. Desmond didn't see any of it that night. He had gone back to his shift at Aldermore, mopped 3 floors, refilled the paper towel dispensers on floors 14 through 22, and taken the L train home just after midnight. His sister, Paulette, had been watching Wren. He had stopped at a 24-hour drugstore on the way and bought a small chocolate cake from the bakery shelf, rainbow sprinkles, the closest he could find, and left it on the kitchen counter with a note that said, "Happy birthday, Wren. Love, Daddy. We'll get the real one tomorrow. I promise." When he came in, Wren was asleep on the couch with a blanket over her. Paulette was in the chair across from her, scrolling her phone with wide eyes. "Des," Paulette said, standing up. "Your phone's been off." "Battery died," he said, hanging up his jacket. "Everything okay?" "No. Desmond. You went viral." He looked at her. "Someone filmed what happened at the café," she said. Wren's question. "It's everywhere. 40-something million views. People are devastated. About that woman and what she did." Desmond sat down on the arm of the couch. He looked at Wren's sleeping face. She had chocolate frosting at the corner of her mouth and was clutching a small stuffed rabbit named Percy that she'd had since she was 2. "Is her face clear in it?" he asked quietly. "Not very. But..." "Okay," he said. "Okay? Des?" "It's okay, Paulette." He was quiet. She asked a real question. If people heard it and it made them think about something, that's not the worst thing. He pulled the blanket up over Wren's shoulder. "But I don't need anything from it. I just need to find her a cupcake tomorrow." He did not know what was already being uncovered. Yvette Okafor was a freelance journalist based in Atlanta, known for the kind of long-form investigation that started with a feeling and ended with a fact nobody could dismiss. She had watched the clip for times. Something about the man in it nagged at her in a way she couldn't organize. She went looking. She followed the Aldermore uniform to their website, their contracts, their client list. They maintained several major downtown Chicago high-rises, including the Novatether headquarters on West Monroe Street. She paused at that. Then she kept digging. She read through old press releases and archived interviews from Novatether's early years. She was reading a profile of Corinna Voss from 6 years ago when she reached a section about the company's founding and the photograph described in the building lobby. She called a contact in Chicago and asked them to go to the Novatether building that morning and photograph the founding team picture hanging in the lobby. The image arrived at 8:14 a.m. Yvette zoomed in. Then she zoomed in again. Standing to the left of a 23-year-old Corinna Voss, in a company t-shirt, holding a circuit board and pointing at something off-camera with the focused expression of a man explaining something technical and important, was Desmond Hale. Younger. Clean-shaven. But unmistakably the same man. She sat back in her chair. Then she called another contact, someone who had covered Novatether's early funding rounds. "Tell me everything you know about the founding team," she said. "Every name. Especially the contract contributors." What she learned in the next 2 hours made the story not just bigger. It made it devastating. Desmond Hale had not simply worked on the Novatether prototype. He had written the foundational system routing algorithm, the logic engine that allowed Novatether's software to communicate between emergency response networks and city infrastructure in real time. It was, according to 2 separate engineers Yvette contacted who had reviewed the early technical documentation, the core innovation that made the product work. Without it, there was no Novatether. There was just an idea. Desmond had been listed as a contract contributor. He had signed a standard work-for-hire agreement for the 11 months he was involved. He had received a flat payment of $18,000 total. No equity. No ongoing royalties. No stake in the company that had been built on what he made. He had signed those papers at 27 years old, when his wife had just been diagnosed and his mind was in 2 places at once and he had needed the money immediately and nobody on the other side of the table had suggested anything different. He had never asked for anything more. He had simply walked away and tried to keep his family alive. And the woman who now held $1 billion in equity built on his foundation had looked at him in a café 10 years later and told him to step aside because he couldn't afford to be there. Yvette posted her thread at 8:47 a.m. It began. "You've all seen the clip. A billionaire humiliated a janitor and his 7-year-old daughter on a live stream. But here's the part nobody's telling you." She posted the lobby photograph. She named the algorithm. She laid out the timeline. She was careful, accurate, and devastating. By 10 o'clock, Desmond Hale's name was the top trending topic in the United States. By noon, 3 law firms had publicly offered to represent him pro bono. By 2 o'clock, Novatether's stock had dropped 4%. And in the executive offices on West Monroe Street, Corinna Voss sat in a chair and read the thread 3 times and did not speak for 11 minutes. Her chief communications officer, Brila Sands, laid out the crisis with the flat precision of someone reading a weather report about a Category 5 hurricane heading directly toward them. The clip. The thread. The algorithm revelation. The advertising partners going quiet. The trending hashtags. The law firm offers. The stock movement. The algorithm detail is the problem, Brila said. Because now it's not just a bad moment on a live stream. Now it's a systemic story. She built $1 billion company on his work, and then she looked at him and told him he didn't belong. Corinna stood at her window, looking down at West Monroe Street. She had watched the clip again that morning. This time she had watched Wren's face when she asked the question. And she had thought about what it meant that a 7-year-old girl, standing in her purple coat, had said out loud the thing that everyone around her was too polished or too cautious or too afraid to say. "Are poor people not allowed to buy cupcakes?" She had not slept. "Where is he right now?" she said. Brila looked up. "He's in this building. Evening shift doesn't start until 4, but he sometimes comes early for." Corinna was already walking to the door. "Corinna, our legal team strongly recommends." Breela, she said, not turning around. Cancel my 2 o'clock. She found him on the 14th floor. He was replacing a ceiling light panel in an empty conference room, standing on a short ladder, both arms raised. He heard footsteps and climbed carefully down and turned to face her and said nothing. He set the panel on the table. He waited. Corinna Voss, in her tailored blazer and her expensive shoes, stood in the doorway of her own conference room and found that she did not have a speech prepared. She was always prepared. It was one of the foundational facts of her identity. But standing in front of this man, who had walked out of a café in the rain without a single angry word, who had put his daughter's field trip fee ahead of her birthday cupcake, who had spent 10 years working in the building that his own mind had helped build without ever knocking on a single door, she had nothing. I know you probably don't want to talk to me, she said. He did not fill the silence. I read what Yvette Okafor wrote this morning, she said. About the algorithm. About what you contributed. She stopped. She looked at him directly. I want to be honest with you. I knew your name. When they told me you worked in this building, I knew who you were. Not your face, I didn't connect it until the thread. But your name was in the original documentation. I knew someone named Desmond Hale had been part of the early team. She paused. I never followed up. In 10 years, I never asked what happened to you. Something moved through Desmond's expression. Not anger. Not surprise. Something quieter. Why are you telling me that? He said. Because you deserve the truth, she said. Not the version my PR team would write. The actual truth, which is that I benefited from your work and then I forgot you existed, and when you were standing in front of me yesterday, I looked at your uniform and I decided in about 3 seconds that I knew everything I needed to know about you. She pressed her lips together. I was wrong. I was completely wrong. And I am sorry. Not because the internet is watching, and not because I need to manage this. Because it was wrong. The conference room was very quiet. Desmond looked at the light panel on the table for a long moment. Then he looked back at her. When my wife got sick, he said, I had a choice. Stay on with the team and try to keep going, or go home and be present while she was still here. I chose to go home. I would make that choice again every single time. He said it without bitterness. As a simple fact. But I also signed papers I didn't fully understand at a moment when my head was somewhere else. And then life happened and I didn't have time to look back. He was quiet. I'm not angry at you for that specifically. The world is full of contracts that favor the person with more to lose. He paused. What I remember is your face in that cafe. And my daughter's face. And the question she asked. Corinna closed her eyes for a moment. Wren asked you if poor people are allowed to buy cupcakes, she said quietly. Yes. What did you say to her on the way home? Desmond was still for a long time. I told her that some people forget that everyone in the world started with nothing. That the only difference between people is the luck of what they were given and the choices they made with it. And that anyone who makes someone feel small for what they don't have is really just afraid of something they can't name. Corinna looked at him. She's 7, he said. So I kept it short. Something in Corinna's expression broke open. Not dramatically. Quietly. The way a scene gives way after years of pressure. I want to try to make this right, she said. And I don't mean publicly. I mean actually right. Which means I need to ask what you need. Not what plays well. What you actually need. He thought about that for a long time. My daughter needs her dad to be home more, he said. That's what I need. Corinna nodded. Then that's where we start. It was not a simple fix. None of it was. The legal process took months. Nova Tether's attorneys and the lawyers who had reached out to Desmond negotiated carefully, and Corinna directed her team to engage in good faith. What resulted was not a settlement designed to make headlines. It was a quiet, fair acknowledgement of Desmond's foundational contribution, structured in a way that gave him financial stability without making him feel like a charity case. The number was not disclosed publicly because Desmond asked that it not be. He had not spent 10 years keeping his dignity intact to trade it for a new cycle. What he did accept, after some time, was the offer of a return to engineering work. Not at Nova Tether, it felt too complicated, too loaded with history and cameras. But Corinna used her network to connect him with a firm called Mercer Collective that had an open position in systems integration. A real position. A stable one. The kind that meant he could drop Wren at school and know he'd be home for dinner. He gave his notice at Aldermore and at the grocery store on the same day. He stood outside the building on West Monroe Street for a moment before he left for the last time. He looked up at it. 14 floors of glass and steel and the work of people whose names were not on the door. He thought about Imara, who had believed in him so completely that she used to save his old design notebooks even after he'd given up on them. He thought about Wren's question in the café and how it had done more to change things than 10 years of his quiet dignity ever had. He thought about how sometimes the most powerful thing in the world is the honest voice of a child who hasn't learned yet that she's supposed to stay quiet. He walked to the L station. He had to pick Wren up from school. Corinna changed, though her changes were harder to see from the outside. She started asking different questions in meetings. She learned the names of the maintenance workers in her building. She changed how Nova Tether handled contract labor agreements, requiring that all future contract contributors receive a plain language explanation of equity options and a 30-day review period before signing. It was procedural, unglamorous work. No cameras. She did it anyway. She gave one interview about everything that had happened. Just one. She said, "I built something I'm proud of. I also spent years not asking who else helped build it." Those two things can both be true. What changes is what you do when you finally see it. Wren Hale turned 8 years old on a Tuesday. Her father took the whole day off for the first time in 4 years. He picked her up at 3 o'clock and she came running through the school gate in her purple coat and crashed into him, and he picked her up and held her for a long moment before setting her down. "Where are we going?" she asked. "You'll see," he said. They walked 3 blocks down Michigan Avenue in the afternoon sun. Wren skipped on every other step the way she always did. She was telling him a story about something that had happened at recess, something involving a bird and a disputed handful of crackers, and Desmond listened to every word. He pushed open the door of Linden and Grove. The same cashier was behind the counter. She looked up and recognized him immediately. Her face did something warm and complicated, and she did not look away. "Hi," she said. "Hi," Desmond said. "My daughter would like the vanilla cupcake. The one with the sprinkles." Wren pressed both palms flat against the glass display case. "That one, Daddy." "I see it, baby." He paid. He had exact change, and a little more. The cashier placed the cupcake in its small box. Then she paused. She took a second cupcake from the case and placed it in the box beside the first. "On the house," she said quietly. "Happy birthday." Wren looked at the 2 cupcakes sitting side by side in the box. Then she looked up at her father. Her face was everything. 7 years of everything. "Daddy," she said. "See? We came back." Desmond looked at his daughter for a long moment. "Yes, we did," he said. He closed the box carefully. He took Wren's hand. They walked back out into the afternoon. The sun was doing that low-angle Chicago thing where it turns the whole city gold for about 40 minutes before it goes down. Wren was already planning how to eat her cupcake, frosting first, or all at once, or maybe save half for Percy the rabbit. She hadn't decided, and Desmond walked beside her and listened and did not think about anything else in the world. That was enough. That was everything. The world had seen a billionaire humiliate a single father and his daughter in a cafe on a live stream. What it didn't see at first was what came after. A woman who had built walls so high she had forgotten that strength is not the same thing as hardness. A man who had given everything he had, his best work, his time, his grief, his quiet dignity, and never once demanded to be seen for it. And a little girl in a purple coat who asked the question that none of the adults around her were brave enough to ask. The world called him poor because it never counted what he gave away. He gave his mind to a company that changed a city. He gave his years to a daughter who will grow up knowing what it looks like when a person refuses to become bitter. He gave his silence in a café to a woman who needed it more than she knew, because sometimes mercy is not giving someone the anger they deserve. Sometimes it is simply walking away with your child's hand in yours and your word that you will find her a cupcake. And you do. You always do. The greatest strength a person can have is not power or wealth or a platform with 2 million followers. It is the ability to remain decent when the world has given you every reason not to be. To keep your word to a 7-year-old even when you are standing in the rain with empty pockets. To know that your value was never in what you could afford. It was always in what you were willing to give. If this story touched you, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Before you go, leave a comment saying, "Even quiet people have a story." Because in the end, the most important stories are the ones that never make the news, until one small, honest voice makes sure that they do.